Welcome to With All Due Respect. This is a podcast for women over 40 who are looking for sane, frank advice about their health and wellness, especially through and after menopause. I'm Amanda Thebe, a personal trainer and nutrition coach, and the author of the best-selling book, Menopause: How I Learned to Thrive During Menopause and How You Can Too. I'd love you to join me every week as I chew the fat with some fab guests on hot topics that directly impact you. I also know the power of conversation is lost, and there's nothing better than sitting down for a natter with your mate and putting the world to rights. And that's exactly what I'll be doing with this podcast. We'll really get to know my guests, warts and all. I've made it my mission to help you by exploding a few myths and presenting you with plain, simple facts. These inspiring conversations will hopefully empower you to be a healthy, strong, resilient bitch, just like me. Before we get started, don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review, and then visit me at amandathebe.com. And now let's get started on today's show.
Not video.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just use the audio. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to With All Due Respect. Today, I am with my pal, Nina Coslov, and she is the co-founder, now the founder of Women Living Better, which is this most amazing, brilliant educational website that's also deeply grounded in research. And Nina set out to try and answer some questions about this phase of our life because it's bloody hard to find. And we know that because we've had tons of conversations about it, both here on the podcast and just in general, all over my website. Now, Nina knows that the information that the scientists are publishing is really hard to disseminate and be understood by the general population that constantly feel overwhelmed by information. And so that's where Nina's role is. And I love it because she's taken what we're learning, what the research is showing us, and then distilling it and going, hey, did you know this? Did you know this? And this is what I love about her work. She's also she's published 6 papers so far that have been in peer-reviewed journals, and done surveys, and is also co-authored a book as well. And so I'm super excited to dig into all of this. Nina, thank you for coming on the show. We're just going to chit chat about your work, but hey, I'm glad to have you on here.
I'm so glad to be on. So glad.
Now, the way that we met was through a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. It was one of those type of conversations. I got a text message from one of my friends in Boston who used to go to Harvard, and she was a friend of my husband. My husband went to the business school with her and said, "Oh, Amanda, you should speak to so-and-so because she's talking about menopause at the moment." And it was somebody else that went to business school who happens to be your best friend. It wasn't that our connection?
Yeah. I mean, I walk with her and she said, "Do you know about this book, Menopause?" And I had seen it, but it was, and she had it. I didn't have it yet. And I said, "I've heard about it." And she's like, "I've got to connect you with this woman." And she had the book and she dropped it at my house the next day. And then she connected us, I think. But it was, one of those
meant to be. Meant to be. And in fairness, we talked initially after the introduction and we were like, oh my God, there's so much we can do together. There's so much we can do together. But what's actually happened is Nina and I have just ended up having monthly meetings or maybe every 2 months and just distilling all of the shit that's out there and getting frustrated and then feeling inspired. But I think that our paths definitely sort of cross in the work that we're doing, don't they? There's definitely some...
I think we share some value. I mean, we're trying to do the same thing in a little bit different ways. But I too really relish our monthly, every other month check-ins because there's so much going on. And I feel like you and I really have it's like a therapy session about
a menopause therapy session.
Yeah, just about what's happening and processing it. And I think we have our fingers in different pots, and it's always so helpful to kind of mind meld with you.
Yeah, I love it too. So, but what I'd love to happen today on the podcast is I'd love my audience to sort of understand your sort of origin story, not in life, but in this menopause world we've both found ourselves in, surprisingly. Yep. Your origin story and sort of what led you to creating the platform that you've got.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. So I think as many of us are drawn in by our own what the heck is going on here stories. For me, I was 42, 43, I had 3 kids under the age of 5, and it was like out of the blue, I stopped sleeping. Like I would wake up at 2 a.m. and it was amazingly consistent. It was like 2:08 to 2:11, something like that. And it was
always like 8 minutes past the hour. Why is that?
I have no idea, but it was some crazy body clock thing happening. And I would wake up and I would have tons of energy. I used to call it like revving. It was not that I just was like waking up and looking at the clock and going to the bathroom or going back to sleep. I had a ton of energy. And so that kept me awake for like an hour or more. And sometimes I'd get up, I'd go try to do something. I would try to do some down dog. I mean, I would try all kinds of things to try to get back to sleep. But it really, really got tough because I had like pretty prolonged sleep deprivation. And then I would say like 2 or 3 months after that, I started feeling what I call like a fragility or less able to cope. And interestingly, we'll scroll forward in a little bit to the Women Living Better website, but it's actually other women that have helped me sort of best explain what it was. And the terms they've used are feeling like I can't calm down on the inside, or my fight or flight response was like really heightened. I now know from the research I've done and that it's the fluctuating hormones really create a sensitivity in our stress response. And so I don't know if that was because of the sleep or just another separate thing, but I was pretty sure something biological was going on or causing this. It's easy to look at your life and think like, oh, I'm kind of running myself ragged with these kids. And at that point I had stopped working, and you can look at your relationship. You can look at all these things and say something might be wrong with me or my life. I had this hunch that there was something physiological that changed. And I went to both my primary care doctor and my OBGYN here in the Boston area. And the first question they both asked me were, are you still getting a regular period? And my response then was yes. And it was true. I was still getting a monthly period. But had I been tracking my period more closely, I would have seen that my cycles were getting shorter. So my periods were coming closer together. And
are they 21 days? Because that's exactly what happened to me.
It wasn't twice. So I, in my kind of my regular days, if there's any regular in this world, was more like 33 to 35 days. But I was now kind of getting closer to 30, 31, 29. So it was a pretty big shift for me. But I wasn't tracking because I wasn't trying to get pregnant. And I started tracking subsequently, and I plotted, and this is on the website, this line that showed a trend line that was actually my cycles were shortening. And that's one of my big messages is like, if you want to know if this is connected, start tracking your cycles if you can, because that will give you a clue that there is something tied into physiology. So I just had this hunch that something was going on, and my providers weren't able to verify it. And look, I am a big proponent of saying we can't throw healthcare providers. It's really disheartening when they can't confirm what we're saying or validate it, but they don't know either. The research hasn't been done, and what research has been done is definitely not making it into medical school curriculum. And so I'm very careful to say that they did what they could. They offered me a sleeping pill, a very strong sleeping pill, which I never took because that just sort of frightened me. They offered me an anti-anxiety medication. And so
I'm the same, actually, by the way. I really respect the medical community. And I think that in my personal experience, my doctors have always wanted to help me, even if they didn't know what they didn't know.
Yeah.
I think that we can't keep throwing doctors under the bus, right? Yeah.
I agree. I totally agree. And so then it randomly happened that a very good friend of mine from graduate school was having a similar experience, but different symptoms. Hers was this like intense irritability. And she was between jobs at the time. And I convinced her, I'm like, do a project with me. There is something going on here. And I had been in kind of business and biotech. And so I knew my way around PubMed and learning how to kind of really get into the research. And we learned so much. We learned so much that we didn't know about how our regular cycles work and what's happening with estrogen and progesterone. And so that was the basis for the site initially. Let's just share what we know, because it would help so much. Education and knowing what to expect and having some understanding of what was available. So we did that first, as you said, like knowledge translation, and created Women Living Better. I should say before that, we did a survey to just see if it was just the two of us, if there were more people. And this was in April of 2016, so 7 years ago now. And we created this survey, and it was for anybody 35 all the way up to like 80. And we did have some 80-year-olds. And we just, where were you cycling? And if you had already reached menopause or you were 5 years out or further, what do you wish you had known? And we just In 2 weeks, we had 400 respondents, and
That's amazing.
they were writing and writing and writing. So we knew we were onto something. And then that's when we decided to kind of start the site. And then in the fall of 18, Joe moved on to another job. And well, this isn't a job. She moved on to a paying job, this project. And I just realized at first I thought, am I going to continue this? Because I really love collaborating and I love working with others. And I was hooked. And I realized that I couldn't let this go, that some mission had found me. I had found a mission. And what I realized was research is what is needed, right? We can translate what's out there, but the data gaps in midlife women's health are just so vast. I mean, they are getting filled. There's a lot of people working on this now, but there is so much we don't know. And so I decided if I could find collaborators, I was like, determined to do a study, again, showing or trying to answer the question, do symptoms start before periods are irregular, right? Because that was my experience. And are you having regular periods? That makes everybody feel really dismissed, because when you say that your period is coming monthly, they say, oh, this can't be perimenopause, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
We did in 2020, we got about 3,000 people. We had an English version and a smaller Spanish version. And I've had a great good fortune of connecting with two amazing research partners. One is an OBGYN who founded a menopause clinic here in Boston. She's been doing menopause care she's in her mid-70s, a long time. And the other was a retired women's health researcher, Dr. Nancy Woods. And she was one of the kind of investigators in one of only 2 studies that started looking at women at 35. So if you think about the average age of menopause is 51, so many studies that have been done start around 45 or so, because it's like everybody wants to know when they're going to get to menopause. And my view was it's worse earlier, or, we need to know more about the earlier stage. And so our survey was basically asking about 61 symptoms and trying to compare where they were, or what the symptom experience was before cycles were irregular and after.
Right.
And what we found was that those two populations in our study were surprisingly similar. There was very little difference between the symptoms reported for women before and after cycles were irregular. And granted, this was the women that were motivated to spend 18 minutes doing our survey were more likely women that were symptomatic.
Yeah, you always get the survivorship bias in these things, of course, because we attract the people that are talking about it. And even if we know that, though, I mean, it's still data that is valid to them, and it can be translated. Yeah. And I like that. I like that you did that, though, because I know that when I think back to my own personal perspective, and you too, the symptoms I had, my cycle was fine. It was shorter, but it had been shorter for a number of years before I just thought, oh, my cycle's 21 days. I had a kid at 38, and then my cycle came back as 21 days.
Yep.
And so, then, yeah.
That's why I think so many people are so disheartened with the way, quote, whatever we want to call it, mainstream medicine handles this, because there's this really clear line in people's heads about, have you skipped a period yet? Is your cycle changing a lot? And I don't think it matters as much as we think. And so that is one of the so education, but also trying to kind of uncover this early, what happens early and what are people's experiences early.
Yeah, because the menopause is essentially studied when we study it, but the perimenopause side is hardly studied, right? That's the harder bit for researchers to look at, right? Because there's too many variables. I understand that. So yeah, it's really important. I remember one of your outcomes made me really perk my ears up, because after I had my last son at 38, I was a late mum as well. Within a year of that, every single time my period came, and it was every 21 days, I got a cold that week. And I want you to talk about that. And I used to go to people, oh God, I've got a cold again. And then I'd just feel run down for 3 days. I'd sneeze, I'd cough, I'd get a sore throat. And then I'd get my period and it would go. And I'd be like, that's so weird. But it's not weird, is it?
It's not weird. And that's another area that research needs to be done. I noticed that way before my cycles even started changing. And I remember asking this of my OBGYN, and she's like, I said, are we a little immune compromised right before we get our period? Because I always feel like I'm getting sick, just like you. And then my period comes and it's like, I'm not sick. It was just this. And she's like, no, that's not a thing. But again, it's not a thing because no one's looked at it. But there is a poll on the Women Living Better site. And I haven't looked at it in the last couple of weeks. But when I look, it is well over 50% of people that take that poll report, yes, that the same thing happens to them. And when I looked at there's not a ton in the research on this, but there is a little bit to suggest it. So when we ovulate, that is when the corpus luteum forms where the egg pops out of the ovary. And that is the gland that produces progesterone. And progesterone does dampen our immunity a little bit in case there is conception and there is some non-us material in it.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit to, that's a whole nother, I'd love to research that with you. Let's put that on the list because
we have a list that's
a big one. I mean, that is, I forgot about that actually, but there's just there are so many things like this that are just not yet known.
So let's talk about this, right? So you get into this research sort of by accident, a little bit like how my work just sort of evolved and it sort of hooked you. And you're like, oh my God, this is so interesting. And you have no problem digging into the research. You find it sort of easy, satisfying, and you're connected with all of the right people. All of the right people are finding you as well, which is great. But how do you sort of get up every day and keep showing up because this is not a paid job. This is a research site. I don't know how you do it. So what keeps driving you forward?
It's a good question. I'm just the unknown and that there are questions to be answered. And I feel like I have lucked out with these research collaborators and the advisors on my board. I mean, nobody is getting paid. But everybody thinks I'm onto something. And I think they really appreciate my energy and my, whatever it is, project management skills to just move this forward. And being able to connect with these amazing research experts is what gets me out of bed in the morning and feeling like we're making progress, right? And when we got that first paper published, right, I said then, I was like, I could just stop. I was so thrilled that there was something out there that finally said, the symptom experience of people before their periods are regular is similar to after. And then Forbes, Joe called and she said, Nina, you're done. Because the title of a Forbes article, a woman wrote an article that sort of exactly said what we had been trying to say. So, but then you never even when you get what you want, you're like, oh, there's so much more to be done. So for instance, we're working on one of the questions we asked in the survey was, what % of the time or how often over the past 3 months have you, or some women report not feeling like themselves during this phase of life? How often was that true for you over the last, I think it was 3 months? And right now we're trying to do the analysis to say, what symptoms does that match up with? Because this is a phrase that Dr. Richardson hears in her clinical practice all the time. I said it. A lot of women have reported it to me, both in person and on Women Living Better. But it's this very vague phase. And my hypothesis is that it's the symptoms that develop that aren't the ones we associate with menopause, right? Or perimenopause. It's not a hot flash, that I know, right? But when you're not sleeping and there's some mood stuff going on and it's like, what is going on here? I just don't feel like myself. So again, if we can sort of better characterize that, and that can help clinicians and it can help women. So
well, I think you and I have got a theory on that. I mean, so for the example, the other day I went on Twitter and I just said, what was the symptom that you experienced? And this obviously isn't an official poll, but I just put the question out there. What's the symptom that was the most surprising to you about perimenopause, right? And people I was like, mine were migraines, right? Something I'd never ever had in my life before. And ultimately that's what was my worst symptom. And the overwhelming number of people responded with anxiety. Sort of know why in a way, especially with the progesterone falling first and it having that anti-anxiety calming effect on us. It sort of makes sense in theory, right? But we still don't really know, right? And when people were answering that, I was like, you and I also know, we've spoken to the people that are researching this. Both of us are connected with Dr. Pauline Mackey, who actually, by the time this podcast comes out, her episode will be out too. She's telling us that the brain changes structure. We know that. So if our brain is impacted so drastically through perimenopause and women are saying anxiety, I can't drive the car anymore. I can't do my job. I'm getting frightened over the simplest things. And then that should be at the forefront of everyone's mind. As soon as women start getting anxious and getting really crippling anxiety in their early 40s, fucking that's perimenopause. Yeah.
That's actually a survey that we're talking about doing. If I don't get fired by my research partners, or not fired, but if they don't say enough of this, that we actually have a survey just on mood, and again, before and after cycles are irregular, because I think you're spot on. I think the things that we don't assume are connected. And then you feel more fragile, and it's at a time in your life when you need to feel less fragile. I'm kind of careful. I don't know how you feel about this, Amanda, but like, to me, it wasn't typical anxiety. Like, I think of anxiety as like heart pounding, like doom, sense of dread. It was just this general, well, I don't know. I called it like a revving, like a heightened stress response more than anxiety. So I'd love to tease that out also.
Like, what level of anxiety? What was it like? So I'll be completely honest. It wasn't something I struggled with in perimenopause. I did have 2 episodes that were anxiety induced, where I just was on and I couldn't switch off. And I was ready to, I was like, thought my head was going to pop off. That's what it felt like. But it only happened twice. And it was really interesting because I was thinking, okay, I'll go and do some deep breathing and try and calm myself down. But in the end, I actually had to go for a run. I had to run out my anxiety, and I went for an hour. I was running. It's the fastest I've ever ran. It was almost like fight and flight was on
overdrive. And that's what people describe. And it's not such a big commute from knowing that the hypothalamus is the temperature regulator, right? And we know that that's the hot flash thing. And like, I don't pretend to know all the brain circuitry, but certainly the brain is connected to our sympathetic nervous system. And I think that also goes kaplooey when the hormones are fluctuating, for sure.
Oh, sure. With its cortisol response as well, and all of those things. So yeah, like, it's super, super interesting. And I just think that you're just only just scratching the surface on this. Like, it's pretty cool. I did want to ask you though, like, so Nina, the paper that you had published, the problem with it was that you were desperate to share it, but wasn't it behind a paywall?
It was, and I hadn't thought of that. So I decided to do a GoFundMe campaign, and people responded, and we raised enough money to get that sucker out. And so now it's on the site. We bought the rights back, and we've been able to share it widely. And we just did it again, actually, with a second paper about the perimenopausal healthcare interaction. And in our initial survey, we said, have you sought healthcare for your most bothersome symptom? And if so, how did it go? And we left an open-ended box, and we analyzed that data. It's called a content analysis. And we use those quotes as data. And that's also a really interesting paper that we're just about to start to kind of promote and share, because it talks about what goes well, when it goes well, a perimenopausal healthcare visit, and what doesn't go well. And the themes you'd expect about being dismissed or saying you're too young, those are all in there. But so are some other ones. And we hope that...
Like what? Are you going to give us any spoilers?
So I think people, when somebody validates your experience and, as you said, says, yeah, these are common, and I don't have all the answers, but let's try and you have team support. That was another positive, when a group of physicians or healthcare providers work together to help you. Validating experiences, feeling heard and supported. Group support. It's interesting, the other side of group support. Some people had a negative interaction. It's like, oh, I have to go to all these different providers. But some people said, oh, this group of providers is working together and I feel really held here. So that's also, I think, a really important paper. I mean, the interesting thing about what's happened with this work is initially my only audience was women, and making them feel, normalizing their experience, making them feel validated. And then essentially I just started kind of crowdsourcing people's experiences, right? That's what this is about. It's women started sending, there's places on the site where you can do polls, and then longer places where you can write in, what other things do you think might be related that aren't currently known? And then I realized, well, I can't do the big NIH funded study, not yet anyway. But if I share our research with the research community, which is why I start going to NAMS, then, and I think Pauline Mackey's one and some others who said, oh, you've made me realize we need to include younger subjects in our studies, right? And now physicians is my point. So there's kind of three audiences. I really want to improve the healthcare interaction too, because I think...
Well, I think that's the key. And this is the place that I see the gap, right? You've got your hand on the pulse with the medical community and the researchers. But it's then feeding that back to us as women. Like we want that information back. And it's like, how do I give these digestible, like little sound bites to women that make them feel heard and stuff? Because that was the sole purpose of you actually starting this, right? And so it's not losing track of that. And but what was really interesting is that your work has been recognized by the North American Menopause Society, right? Didn't you win a little award? Are you like, do you love it? Like, is it like the Oscar of the menopause community or something?
It's a little plaque that we have, on the bookshelf. Yeah, it was the media award, which was really validating, right? And it's amazing that, again, you said, what gets me out of bed in the morning and continuing to do this work? It's that people see it as valid. I mean, Dr. Stephanie Fabian, who's the chief medical officer of the North American Menopause Society, has cited the work a couple of times. I don't even know she's going to do it, and all of a sudden I hear that she has, and I'm so grateful. I mean, it's good. It's meaningful to other people, and they feel like it's filling a gap. So we hope to do more of that in other places. So
yeah, I feel like you need to be like co-opted by someone, and people go, look at the value that Nina's given. Let's just pay her like $250,000 a year just to keep doing this.
All right, you find that person, I'm all in.
You're all in now. No, so it's so great. So yeah, like I said, I feel like you really sort of crossed that bridge for us. Like I'm super interested in it. I don't have the experience to be able to do research. I'm working with people with the new NIA project, and that one of the legs of that is there's a research component. If we're going to have people come in, it would be absolutely crazy not to use this opportunity to provide the research. So I might reach out to you then, actually. Yes. But so what? If anyone's listening to this, like my audience, and they're going, oh, well, all this is really well and good. Like, so Nina's doing all this work and we're finding out all of this information, and hopefully this will drive change in how we practice medicine for women, and it'll drive change in how we look at research from like an age cohort, experience, etc. But for me as a woman, how can I participate in this? How can I be part of this? Because it matters to me. Like, what can they get from you? Can they come to your website to do things?
I mean, they can come and sign up for the newsletter, which I have to admit is like it's not that regular. But when I have something to say, I put something out. It's not monthly, but sometimes you get 2 in 1 month. Sometimes you go a couple months. I go a couple months without it. But that is where when we do subsequent research, we will ask newsletter subscribers to help us spread the word. And I do hope that we will have at least 1 or not 2 more studies. And I think this is something that we have to kind of take into our own hands as women and say, we don't want our daughters and granddaughters to happen upon this time without more knowledge. And I mean, our first survey proved to me that it can be done. So, and then just discuss and share your own experience with other people, share the Women Loving Better website. I mean, that's another thing that keeps me going here is every time somebody uses the contact us and says, oh my gosh, I wish I had found this sooner. This is so great. Thank you so much. There are little places on there. You can donate $10 or $20. I mean, again, I want this to be a crowdsourced women taking this into their own hands and helping move this forward. And I think it can happen.
It's like being prepared over profit for you. That's how I feel about when I look at your work. Like it's getting women completely ready. But within the website under that, you've got a couple of different segments. You've got the learn, the take action, which I love actually that you've called it that, the research and the perspectives. If people head under the research, you've got some active polls within there. Would you recommend people go over to there?
I mean, the polls are a very shallow version, but I do look at those, and every once in a while I'll write a blog post on those. But what's really gratifying is you can take the poll and hit results, and you can just see what other people are experiencing. And I think that is the one that you mentioned, I think, is in there. People can go, and there's a whole bunch in there. There's actually, I had to put them in one of those accordion things because the page was going on and on, but there are several polls in there about different types of symptoms. And then if you at the very bottom, I think it's still at the bottom of that page, there's an open-ended thing. So if you think there's something that you're experiencing that I don't have on the site yet, or you've never seen anywhere, put it in there, because I kind of keep track of those too.
Yeah, because you haven't got enough to do in your day, so why not get more stuff to do? That's what it sounds like to me.
Frenetic, I know it's a vicious cycle, but it's fun. I love the data, and I love that not all, but most of the items on our survey were in women's words, and it was what women, how they described their symptoms. As I said, the fight or flight, feeling like I can't calm down on the inside. Because we know this best, and there is no other authority. And I feel like we can ourselves generate a new normal of what to expect. And I think knowing what's coming is half the battle here. I mean, you can talk to other people about remedies and hormones or not hormones and all types of things. But I think there is such huge leverage to be gained by just having the knowledge of what's coming.
I had readiness, right? I mean, I like the difference between my personal 2 years of like in the abyss, like sort of not knowing what was going on compared to the following 6 years. So it was still very challenging, but at least I knew the beast I was fighting were night and day. And there are studies to show how it can lessen the burden of some of the symptoms, especially because symptoms are stress driven as well. I mean, not completely, obviously, but if you're struggling with symptoms and then you're stressed on top of that, it's going to be extra shitty.
Absolutely. You can be anxious about your anxiety, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. And I say that too. Like, I feel much better, not that I don't have any symptoms, but I just feel so much better because I feel like all of this work and connecting with you and a million other people, like, it's just validating. It's normalizing.
Yeah, it is. It is. I love it anyway. I love everything you're doing. But so, hey, let's talk about like what's next. So would you like to share anything that's coming up with any of my listeners today, and just let people know where to find you? I'd love that. Just so
so womenlivingbetter.org is where to find the site. And then from there are, I believe, there are places you can email me at nina@womenlivingbetter.org. If you can't find it on the site, I'm always happy to hear from.
I love the newsletter. It's really good. I love your newsletter.
And And then once you're on the newsletter, that's my main way. I mean, Amanda has been very generous with her trying to help me with my Women Living Better strategy. And she was like, Nina, no, just do this, just tag me. That is a falling down effort at this point. I put some stuff like when we have a new paper out or when we kind of promote new research and have more to say, I do kind of get my shit together for some social media. But I think the newsletter, sharing the website, and there will be some stuff coming out about this healthcare provider perimenopausal interaction paper. And I think that's what's next. And then some surveys. So I know just being in touch with you, Amanda, is going to be hugely helpful there because...
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'd love to get people to do your surveys with you. And, I was thinking about the healthcare provider thing. Like, we're trying to get leverage to change how healthcare providers look at menopause, which is not anything at the moment. They don't get the training. They don't have the knowledge base. We have data to say this is how many we know women there are. This is how many healthcare providers we've got. Well, then that's an argument for the medical schools to actually make a difference, right? I mean, in Canada, we actually have that information. So we've got like 5 million women in Canada in menopause, and 1 in 5 don't have a family physician. And then we even have a rural crisis where, like 1/5 of the population are rural and there's only 8% of our doctors serve them. And then only 27% of physicians said they're even interested in speaking about menopause proactively. Like we know some of the numbers already in Canada. It's shocking. That basically is like saying you're on your own, love.
Right.
And so if we know these numbers and if you can get this validated, then this is the way that we can sort of start changing, because we're dealing with a real fixed patriarchal system in the US that's literally so hard to penetrate, right? Yeah. That I think the only way to break through it is with actual data, right? And saying there's a knowledge gap, there's a failing here.
Yeah. And the other thing is it doesn't have to be medicalized, right? You and I have talked about that. No. So, I mean, I don't know. I was just talking to somebody this morning about this number of it's 25% of women have really moderate to severe hot flashes. And I don't know what the actual number is of people that actually need to seek healthcare to manage symptoms. And I'm all for it when you need to. But my hope is that if we get enough of this good information out there, it will take away, as you said, the anxiety about what is going on with me, right? And it will sort of normalize that these things are part of this path to menopause. Absolutely seek care when symptoms are interfering in your life, for sure. But I think knowing what to expect and knowing what's normal will also lessen the need for...
Yeah. And then also the idea that, that what to expect, this is normal. And it's called a menopause transition for a reason, that in the majority of cases, and I say this all the time with people like, no, that's not true. Your symptoms don't get better. They do. Statistically, they do. We know that. We see that. Doesn't mean to say you're going to be completely the same at the other side of it. And things don't just disappear straight away. But we need to be sort of like factual about this and help women realize that their body is sort of equipped to deal with this.
Yep. And I think that the other thing is that, like all other things, there's a distribution here. There's no two ways that people go through menopause or get to menopause, the final day of your final menstrual period. And I think the more we learn about the different paths, the better it will be. Because I have heard from some people, they, reach menopause and they still are having hot flashes, and they say so it doesn't get better for everyone. But the lack of the crazy fluctuating hormones, I do think the things associated with that do go away. So there's so much more research to be done. And I think we're getting there with there's another, I would love it to happen. There's another group I'm working with to maybe get a wearable study going in perimenopause. And so it's the Wild West still. We're pioneers. And I think I hope sooner than 10 years, we'll look back and know so much more.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we're just starting now. And I think that I actually am quite excited about the potential of this. And I know we need to do it because the next generation are not going to stand for the BS that we all put up with. So, I mean, we're fighting our way through this to make some active change. So anyway, Nina, thank you for coming on today. Thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you. And I will be meeting up with Nina in real life in June. So I'm very excited about hanging out and having a coffee and a chit chat. It'll be awesome.
Can't wait. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you like what you hear, then why not subscribe to this podcast and leave me a review? You see, when you do this, it helps to raise the profile of my show and attract new listeners. And it also allows me to continue to deliver valuable content with great guests. And in return for you doing that, I will send you my 12-week core-focused program called Abs on Fire as a thank you. Simply drop me an email at amanda@amandasteve.com and I'll wing that your way. Bye.